back when the reservation system started happening, it became legalized for Native children to be removed from their parents. And this was not due to abuse or neglect. This was simply because they were Native American. And they were purposely removed from their parents, and they were forced into these Indian boarding schools. These Indian boarding schools were a tactic of assimilation, starting with children who we know have very programmable minds. And so what happens to children, they typically tend to become products of the environments that they're raised in. So the assimilation tactic that was initiated by the United States military was to traumatize these children so deeply and to remove them so completely from their family systems, from their culture, their traditions, their ceremonies, through authoritative tactics and through abuse and trauma, including sexual abuse, which is a form of breaking the spirits. That hopefully the goal in their mind, the U.S. military, was that these children would not even want to be Indian anymore, as they say it in their own words. So these boarding schools did have a very traumatizing impact on our communities. And we can see that to this day, the effects that it caused in the central nervous system and the way the brains worked of our ancestors, all of that trauma has been passed down, and that has created intergenerational trauma, and it has changed the way that we operate on a neurological level.
To a Broaderlands podcast. The opinions expressed on Broaderlands podcasts are those of the guest speakers and do not necessarily reflect the views of the host or Broaderlands podcast. Stephanie Big Eagle, welcome to Broaderlands podcast.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, I appreciate it. Maybe before we get started, you can introduce yourself and a little bit about what you do.
Sure. My name is Stephanie BigEagle, and I am a member of the Ihanktuan Dakota Nation, or the Yankton Sioux. I also have ties to the Gulwijasha and the Ishanti Dakota nations. So I am a mixed native. So I'm my native ancestry is from my father's side, and then on my mother's side, I am Celtic and Nordic. So I've got a lot of different ancestors. Some say they're fighting each other, but I feel at peace with myself and who I am, and it's been a long road of discovery to that. And I share that journey in my book. So I'm the author of Thunderbird Rising. It's a memoir of reconnection, resilience, and empowerments. And I'm also a traditional handpoke tattoo artist. So I'm an artist of many forms. I'm also a traditional dancer, a singer, many other things. But people mostly know me for my tattoo art, my book, and my social media presence.
Awesome. Yeah. I'm a model for Target. So,
no way.
Yeah. I wear like Lee jeans and different types of jeans. And yeah.
Oh, that's awesome.
No, I'm just messing around. I would love to begin with honoring the indigenous nations of the Great Turtle Island. I'd love for you to share on that briefly, if you don't mind, and what we now call the Americas, and what ancient wisdom echoes still from the lands and within our DNA that humanity is being called to remember.
All right. Well, there are over 500 federally recognized tribes here in the United States. There are more that are not recognized. And there are indigenous people all the way up into Canada and down into the South America, Central America, and South America. So we are the indigenous people, or the first people of these continents. And our creation stories always speak to how we came out of these lands. For example, as Dakota people, we came out of Bidote, which is a cave system that is now in Minneapolis, Minnesota. That Minneapolis, Minnesota has been established on top of these traditional places that our people say that we emerged from. Also, the Lakota side say we came out of Wing Cave. So a common theme, as far as I know, amongst most Indigenous nations are our creation stories, which speak to how we came to
Yeah.
being. And I think it's time that Indigenous voices and stories be heard, because now we can see that science is actually catching up with these creation stories and the narrative that was in the past that we came from other places, that we walked across the Bering Straits, or, whatever is being said, are being disproven. And our creation stories, Indigenous storytelling, Indigenous oral history is a valuable part of all of our connection as humanity, and can help tell the story for all of us of how we came to be here.
I have a book on the native wisdom, and it shares how they're sharing. Native people are sharing their stories with Christianity when they came, and so they're sharing back and forth. And uh, uh, I think I don't know if he was Catholic or like a Christian pastor or whatever, but he stands up and he starts laughing at the native, stories. And he goes, I gave you this truth, the word of God, and you're going to share with me these stories." And then an elder stood up and says, if there was a Jesus, I come to realize he was probably one of us, because you look at us as animals. You can't eat with us, or be around us. You treat us like we're different. If anything, Jesus is more of a brother to us than to you. But it's sad. I was telling you about Herd Museum here in Phoenix, Arizona, and a lot of the harm through the era of colonization and Christianity. And I think it's important to touch on this stuff because it still affects us to this day, whether we're unconscious of it or not. Conscious of it or not, and I'd love for you to touch on that, and the how it brought the boarding schools, and how it still affects humanity to this day. It's sad, but I would love for you to acknowledge that, and share your thoughts on how to heal from this.
Sure. So, as you were telling me, I hadn't heard of the Herd Museum before you told me about it. But from my understanding, it is a museum that explores some of the history of the boarding schools, the Indian
Mm.
boarding schools here in the States. So, probably, 90% of the population is still not aware of what they truly are. And if they are aware, they aren't aware of the depth of the abuse that happened at these schools, even the deaths of young Indian children that are.
Wow.
The investigations are underway now that are just beginning, that are starting to unearth the bones of a lot of children that died at these schools. So, back when the reservation system started happening, it became legalized for Native children to be removed from their parents. And this was not due to abuse or neglect. This was simply because they were Native American. And they were purposely removed from their parents, and they were forced into these Indian boarding schools. These Indian boarding schools were a tactic of assimilation, starting with children who we know have very programmable minds. And so what happens to children, they typically tend to become products of the environments that they're raised in. So the assimilation tactic that was initiated by the United States military was to traumatize these children so deeply and to remove them so completely from their family systems, from their culture, their traditions, their ceremonies, through authoritative tactics and through abuse and trauma, including sexual abuse, which is a form of breaking the spirits, that hopefully the goal in their mind, the U.S. military, was that these children would not even want to be Indian anymore, as they say it in their own words. So these boarding schools did have a very traumatizing impact on our communities. And we can see that to this day. The effects that it caused in the central nervous system and the way the brains worked of our ancestors, all of that trauma has been passed down, and that has created intergenerational trauma, and it has changed the way that we operate on a neurological level. And so that was passed down to me. My father was a boarding school survivor. My grandmother was affected by the boarding school, and generations of our ancestors before that were affected by these boarding schools. And so that healing runs really deep. It affects our ability to communicate effectively. It affects our ability to control our emotions and to produce feelings of happiness or peace. And that was the intention, however. Healing from this is going to take 7 generations. They say that once that healing starts, it takes 7 generations to clear from the bloodlines. And that's why it's so maniacal, their plan of what they carried out. And they say that not the Nazis, Hitler particularly, studied what tactics were used here in the States against Native people for what they did in the future against the Jews. And that's a genocide that's acknowledged. That's a genocide that's everyone is aware of. And I feel that we need that justice here too. We need that level of awareness to occur, because acknowledging the truth of what happened and then addressing the trauma, creating programs for healing, especially based in our traditional cultures, customs, and ceremonies, will initiate that healing that we need.
Thank you. I've been sober for a long time, and I've been in the 12-step community, right? And one time I heard an old timer saying, because there's a lot of Navajo that were at a meeting here in Arizona, and he says, "Man, it runs in their genes." And I said, "You know why? It's because of the collective ancestral and generational trauma that happened." And he couldn't even comprehend that. I don't believe in the disease model, because every alcoholic or addict, there's always some addiction. There's always some pain within the addiction. There's some form of trauma there, unresolved trauma that's trapped. So we need to soothe ourselves. Calling it a disease just kind of bypasses on the real problem, the emotional and psychological pain that's within our mind and body. But how do you see the rise of addiction and alcoholism in the indigenous communities? Is it a symptom of spiritual disconnection caused by that colonization? And how might ancestral memory guide us back to healing?
I do believe it's a symptom of the trauma that we experienced that was passed down and that continues to be perpetuated by the survivors of these boarding schools. I mean, for example, my father, my biological father, I have a stepfather too, but my biological father was in these schools as a child, and he was taught these behaviors, these learned patterns of abuse, and he recycled that behavior and didn't get the healing from our traditional ways, our ceremonies, even, going to therapy, and he numbed himself through substances. And I think that it's easier to access substances sometimes than it is to go to ceremony, to have the discipline that is required to fast. A lot of our ceremonies as Indigenous people require fasting, sacrifice, discipline, mental focus. And so it's often more easily accessible, and it's just easier to pick up something like alcohol or some sort of substance that will just numb the pain. And so it's a form of self-preservation, because sometimes the trauma is so deep and so disturbing that people will not be ready to face that in this lifetime. And you can't always look at the person and blame them for it. Although part of us coming into healing, for example, I had to separate myself from my own father for my safety. But I understand the root of where that comes from. And I pray for the future generations that come from my line to be cleared of that healing through my willingness to go to ceremony, to heal, to look into the truth, to share my voice. And so there are some of us within each family, I think, that are going to be given the opportunity and the resilience, the resolve to help our family lines to clear some of that trauma. And I don't think that, although we have to hold people accountable for their actions, we have to remember the source of where this all came from, and that, and hold hope that, and take action on the knowing that we can clear this for our children. But it is going to take time, and it is going to, unfortunately, some of us are going to have to step away from the people who aren't healed in our environments in order to do so. And that's sacrifice. But there is power in that. And there is power in raising up our children in healthy environments, free from abuse, breaking that cycle. Because if they could do that, and they knew that removing the children from their parents and placing them in these boarding schools and putting them through the trauma that they did, that would break their spirits, imagine what we can do now is taking that power back in our hands of how we choose to raise our children, the environments that they're in, even, homeschooling our children. That was something that we never used to do, was to outsource our children to strangers for them to be raised by strangers. Even things like that, we can take it all back and choose to put our children first, and to put their healing first, and to think of the changes that will create for the generations to come.
Yeah, Gabor Mate talks a lot about how indigenous people often used some form of substances to tap into the Great Spirit. They never had these addiction problems until the colonization that happened and genocide. When you go to Heard Museum, you can literally see the what do you call that? When you the conversion process. You can see the conversion process where children walk in and they're basically kidnapped from their families, cut off their hair. Is that a sign of grief when you cut off the hair, which probably
Of
created a lot of
mourning.
confusion?
Yes, of
A
mourning,
mourning.
of losing a family member.
So they were losing their culture, their spirit, right? In a way, and they're cutting off their hair, giving them new names, changing their clothes, their language. And it was sad. It was sad. And, yeah, anyone that has a heart can not walk through that without crying, with the heart. I mean, for me, it was just really sad to see. And it does talk about the molestation that happened and the murders. People, they were tortured, and it's sad. And I think it's important to acknowledge. So, yeah, thank you for sharing on that.
Yeah,
An,
thanks for
an,
bringing it up. It's an important topic.
Another thing that you talk about is tattooing, the
Mhm.
sacred practice that was taken away from your people. Maybe you could share a little bit about your ancestral history and the spiritual power of traditional tattooing.
Sure. So I started taking an interest in traditional tattooing about 12, 13 years ago. I started just taking an intense interest in it. And I didn't see any signs of it from my nation in particular, Lakota and Dakota, but I was seeing it from the Iroquois, the Haudenosaunee Nation, and other nations that did still have more evidence at that time of their tattoo traditions. And so I started to ask around, and I said, does anybody know about if there's traditional tattoos from our side, Lakota and Dakota side? And I started to find that evidence, just little pieces of evidence here and there. I mean, there was not much. It was like trying to find a needle in a haystack, but I found it. And that's part of my story of becoming a traditional tattoo artist, because of the childhood that I had, because of how much I was separated from myself and from love, or in general, being raised in a very abusive environment. When I started to really wake up to myself and find what would be my guide in my life, which is my spirituality, my dreams, my heart, learning how to follow my heart, I used that process, following my heart, following my intuition, having the courage to do what my heart was telling me to do, and praying about things, tapping into my own spiritual source and my higher self, my knowledge. Then I knew that receiving the tattoos myself was a very important part of my journey that my ancestors were opening up the path for me to do.
Mm.
So at the time that I found those first little pieces of evidence that I needed, that our Lakota and Dakota people did practice traditional tattooing, then I said, okay, because at the time I was in a relationship with a Maori man, and he was a Maori practitioner, tohuna, which is considered an expert, and his specialty was in Maori culture. And so he was very supportive of me and encouraged me very, very strongly to receive traditional tattoos. And he knew one of the best tamoko artists in the world. So tamoko is the Maori practice of traditional tattooing. So this artist had been putting tattoos on the faces of his own people for generations. I'm sorry, decades.
Mm.
So, and the teachings that were passed down to him had been kept for generations. So they were one of the first to teach me about traditional tattooing in the sense of how it works, how traditional artists channel designs for the people that they tattoo, how deep the connection is, how sacred it is, especially to tattoo the face. And so that was my real first introduction of working with a traditional tattoo artist and with a culture, with the Maori traditional tattoo culture. The tamoko culture has mostly been held intact, although they did experience a generation or two of the suppression, the legal suppression of their cultural practices. It wasn't as extensive as it was here in the States.
Mm.
So I was able to learn a lot from them about how it works on a spiritual level. And that opened me up to trusting the tamoko artist that the person I was in a relationship was introduced me to, and to trust him to channel the designs that were meant for me to help me on my journey to revitalizing our traditional tattoo customs over here in the States, particularly for my side, the Lakota and Dakota side. And so once that happened, I put out a story about my experience and what my tattoos meant, and it went viral.
Mm.
And after that, I was invited by a traditional tattoo artist in Los Angeles to learn about how to tattoo and handpoke tattoo. So I accepted that invite, and everything came from there as far as being a traditional tattoo artist.
Yeah, thank you. Is there a connection with Native American people in Polynesia?
There are, so my friend, like I said, was a tohuna, and his expertise was in Maori culture. So he holds a lot of their old stories that have been passed down for generations. And I've had him and several of his elders share with me prophecies and teachings that speak to our connection as Native Americans and Polynesia, that we came from a same ancestor, that basically were given different baskets of knowledge and went in different directions, but the original source being of the same
Mm.
ancestor.
Interesting. Yeah, I've always felt that intuitive feeling that there's some kind of relational connection there. And I also maybe Lemuria or Mu. I wonder if the ancestors came from Mu. I wonder if there's a connection there.
What's Mu?
Yeah, it was before Atlantis. That's no longer here, and some say Hawaii was part of it.
That's interesting because I've heard people mention Lemuria when I tell them where I was born, because I was born in Hawaii.
Hmm.
And I'm Lakota and Dakota, but I was born there because my dad was stationed there at the time I was born. So I have heard that connection with Lemuria, I think it's no accident that I, in particular, was born there. So they say that if you were born, you carry the energy of where you were born with you for your entire life, and that people who were born in Hawaii are Lemurians. So there's a lot of Polynesian there too, who, would be considered Lemurians. But I don't know a lot about that. That's just what I've been told, what I've heard.
And sometimes you see the serpent symbology all over. You see it in the Americas. You see that serpent mound in Ohio, or you'll see it in Hawaii. And it's sad going to Hawaii and seeing all the native indigenous people there homeless because of what happened. And there's all these churches and golf courses, but the Hawaiian people are homeless, a lot of them, and it's sad.
Yeah. And we see the same thing here in South Dakota. There's a lot of, homeless, displaced Lakota and Dakota people, because it's like this system was established on top of our homelands that doesn't serve us, intentionally doesn't serve us. And it's the same with a lot of indigenous communities around the world getting displaced on their own homelands because of these systems that establish themselves illegally on top of them that intentionally do not serve them.
Yeah, it hurts me to hear about when people get labeled or be dehumanized, being called illegal aliens. Like if they're not human beings, or this ain't their land. It's sad.
It's all part of the programming.
Yeah, you're right. You have a view. I've heard you in a number of interviews, and in one of your interviews, I heard you share about the power of tattooing, but with the dream vision of being in a concentration camp.
Oh, yes. Okay. You want me to share about that dream?
Please, it's beautiful.
All right. So something that I forgot to mention when we were just talking about tattooing is that tattooing at the essence of it is about telling our stories as individuals. It can also show what we're connected to, our families, our positions within our tribes or nations, whether we are married or not, etc. There is so much that's written in tattooing, where back in the day, it was so elaborate that other people could come from other nations and immediately know your story based on your tattooing. So it's a message that's being shared, and it's really important, the artists that you work with and their ability to channel what is meant for you, the designs. And so that dream, I was in a concentration camp. And so this dream happened after the Standing Rock movement, which I was involved with that movement. I created a design. It was based on a petroglyph that is in what is now known as Minnesota. And it's a petroglyph because Minnesota was at one point Dakota homelands. Because of colonization, the Ojibwe people moved in and we got pushed more into the plains area, more eastern. But it had been Dakota land before all of that. And so there is a petroglyph out there, a pretty well-known petroglyph of a Thunderbird. And you can see that Thunderbird now on some flags of the Ojibwe people. But for a lot of us who know the history of that area, we know this petroglyph was put there by our Dakota people. And so that Thunderbird was inspired to create the top part of this design here, which is the Thunderbird. And underneath it is the river of life. And those 7 dots represent the 7 the 7 council fires of the Ochedi Shakoan, or the Great Sioux Nation. And that was representing the water that we were there protecting. So the Thunderbird was asked through this design to help protect the water protectors, to protect the water, to be a symbol of our choice to stand up against these systems of oppression, these environmental genocidal acts from, for example, companies like the Dakota Access Pipeline, etc. This was a prayer to help us stand up against that and forevermore to protect us, asking the Thunderbird for its help. And so everyone who got this tattooed helped to carry that prayer. And so In this dream, after Standing Rock, I was in a concentration camp with my son, my youngest son, who was also at Standing Rock with me. In this concentration camp, there were a line of us prisoners, and the guards were walking in front of that line, and they were carrying this little device. If I could relate it to anything, it would be like in the movies with Men in Black, where they held that erasure
Yeah.
mind memory eraser device in front of people, and it cleared their memories. Well, this device was used to subjugate the prisoners. And so they'd carry it along the line, and each person that was exposed to this device would just be calm, wouldn't want to fight back or anything. So, but however, when they came up to me, I held my arms in front of me. I crossed them in front of me like that, and both of my Thunderbird tattoos lit up.
Wow.
And when they lit up, it blocked that device. And
Mm.
whatever that device was doing, it nullified it. It had no effect on me. Well, this made those guards really mad. So they took me and my son and they threw us in this vehicle. So they had vehicles like this at Standing Rock, and they were sound cannon vehicles. They were like big Humvees, kind of like those kind of vehicles. And inside, it was all padded so that the sound would remain inside of it. And so they threw me and my son inside of there, and they locked us in there.
Mm.
And then they started playing this sound, and this sound made me immediately collapse to the ground, and I felt like I was going to die. And so I crawled over to my son, and I put my body over him to try to shield him from the vibrations, but I couldn't. It's vibrations. It went through both of our bodies. And I just thought I was going to die. So, but all of a sudden I heard my ancestors say to me, "Sing." And I said, "Well, I ain't gonna sing right now. What are you talking about?" and they yelled at me. They said, "Sing." So I started singing, and I started to sing the song that had been singing for years. That every time I was sad, or I was missing somebody, or my kids, or so, I would sing that song, and so it carried a lot of history and emotion and meaning for me. And so I started to sing that song, and it ended the dream. And so
Wow.
it ended that attack. And what's interesting even further about it is that I woke up from that dream, and my son woke up shortly after, and we were both sick for the
Wow.
rest of the day. We were dizzy. We felt sick to our stomachs. It was hard to get out of the bed. And so was that an astral attack? Were we being targeted? I believe that what we experience a lot of time in the dream worlds is actually happening in another world, on an astral plane, in the dream world. And that's why for a lot of us Indigenous peoples, our elders teach us that we are meant to follow the messages and the guidance and the paths that are shown to us in our dreams, because it's not just a dream. It's imparting messages from these other worlds and other realities and other timelines that do all exist on parallel planes. And we
Mm.
can access these places through our dreams. So bringing it back to the tattoo connection is that, our tattoos, even traditionally, some of them were given as forms of protection. And so what was the meaning behind this design? The prayer that was imbued into it, we were asking the Wakia, or the thunder beings, for protection against those oppressive systems. And that's exactly what it did in that dream.
So why did your people stop giving each other tattoos?
From what I was taught from one of my elders, she said it was colonization itself. So back when we first started being exposed to the colonizers, Those who, at the time, amongst our people who had tattoos, especially on the face, were those who were usually of leadership or a leadership position, or they were matriarchs. They were highly acknowledged warriors. They were medicine people. These were the ones who had the most tattoos back in the day because it was something that was earned. It was something that was also expensive
Mm.
because resources, back in that day, we were mostly following the buffalo and going through 6 months of winter on and off. Tattooing was something that wasn't as readily available as it might be to nations that were in areas where they didn't have to be nomadic. So,
Mm.
or where it was warmer. So you have to think about all of these reasons why behind things, and that tattoos were not as plentiful for people who maybe didn't have the means to get them at the time or the accomplishments to get them back then. So this became quickly recognized by the colonizers. So they be made people into targets. Because
Mm.
if you take out the leadership, right, then you can subdue the people much more easily. So there was also the factor of the overwhelming judgment that came from the colonizers to those who were tattooed because of their Christian ideals of tattooing, which were completely opposite of our traditional perspective of tattooing. And so it became a matter of self-preservation and survival to shut down the tattooing because of what we were going through, because of the genocide that we were going through.
It's crazy how to think about history and how they forced these Christian ideals upon people and labeled everyone as devil worships or evil spirits or pagans or whatever you want to, whatever they used. But they're the one doing the murdering. They're the one doing the torturing and the enslavement. It's crazy. And then it's hard once you develop a belief system. It's hard to break, even if it's not right. It just
Especially when it's
amazes
a
me.
fear-based system.
Yeah.
Fear-based systems, especially when you indoctrinate them into young children, are very effective. And going back to what you said about, they forced these ideals on people, but then they were the ones doing the actual, violating the Ten Commandments and on a daily basis. They were the original narcissists, right?
Yeah.
And
You're right. It's crazy.
they were the original ones. They taught it.
Yeah, it's crazy. Even like on Halloween, you hear about witches and stuff, and that's witchcraft. That's evil. But who's the one doing all the hanging?
Right. And the hunting.
Yeah. um. Yeah. Do you ever? Is there any stories of Lakota Bigfoot stories? Do you
Yeah,
know?
I have teachings more about that. And I've heard some stories about Bigfoot. So in our language, they are called Shie Tonka, which means big brother or elder
Mm,
brother. And so they are like elders. They've been here on this earth longer than we have,
wow.
and they carry teachings for us as well so we can learn from Bigfoot. And Bigfoot is considered to be a highly psychic being, an interdimensional being, which means that they originate here on Earth, but they have such psychic, powerful abilities that they can go in and out of these different dimensions. Like for us, we have to dream unless we're
Mm,
really, you know, developed in that, which it's not very often, or it's very rare that someone is developed that psychically, but they can access it at will. And, these are just the teachings that I have. I believe it with all my heart. But they've been under persecution too, from what I've been told. They've been being
wow.
targeted by these colonialist oppressive systems because these beings are protectors of the earth. And so their presence alone has kept a lot of the complete destruction of this earth and even of our people at bay. So they're like a you know, almost like you can think of like the troll under the bridge. I don't know why this is coming to me, but like they almost protect these areas. And I can see that these Bigfoot are protecting these corporations that just want to take everything from the earth and from the indigenous people. They are one of the most powerful beings that is standing in the way of that and preventing that from happening. And, they don't want to be seen. They can see, they know if people are looking for them. And for the most part, they won't show themselves unless they want to be seen. And from the other stories that I've heard is that Bigfoot, if he does show himself or if they do show themselves, it's usually a warning because sighting a Bigfoot is a warning of changes to come, earth changes to come, and that we need to prepare for those earth changes.
When I was in Cancun, which means the serpent's nest, there was you brought up Troll under a bridge, and my cab driver who's taking me up to he was taking me up to Chichen Itza from Cancun, and we go under a bridge. We go under a freeway, and there's a little temple there, and I'm like, "What's that little temple?" And he goes, "Oh, that's for the Alush." I'm not sure if I'm saying it right, but that's for the Alush people. I go, "What do you mean? Who's the Alush?" And in the glyphs, it shows little people in some of the Maya glyphs, right? And he's describing that, and he goes, "I witnessed this in my life, in my lifetime, that this bridge was built when I was a kid, and it collapsed." He goes, "And they built it again, and it collapsed one more time, and someone said you didn't ask permission." And so they finally asked permission to the Alush, and it stood the third time around, and they built that little temple in honor. So that brought that to my mind with the troll under the bridge thing.
That is so cool. Yeah, so there are all these other nations that do exist that most people are just not aware of because, they exist on a higher vibrational frequency. And if you're
Mm,
not aligned with that yourself, you mostly aren't going to see it. You're not going to know about it until, and in a lot of cases, like Bigfoot stories, they come as warnings, like you better shape up, that kind of a warning. So, and I have seen what I was told was a Wiwila myself, Wiwila, a little person. And I saw one of these beings in Northern California,
wow.
probably 2008. Nope, it was 2014. I saw one of these beings myself. Scared me. And it wasn't like a little person. When I think of a little person, I think of like these little tiny. I don't think that would have scared me. But see, what I saw was about this tall on me. It was shorter than me, but I'm, 5'6", and it stood shoulder length, so
Mm,
shoulder height to me. So I didn't think that it was a little person, but the person who was with me who saw it as well, and they're from the Oglala Lakota Nation, so born and raised on Pine Ridge Reservation, they told me that it was a Wiwila. And so I trusted that. But even to this day, I really think about that. What was that being? Because I was so scared of it. I could feel its energy. I could feel its power, and it stood this tall on me. So what really was it? Because I think that the little people, even though they can be tricksters, I don't know if they carry that much of a powerful energy that this being had where
mm,
I was frozen when
wow.
I saw it. I couldn't move. I don't know if it was paralyzing me or if I was just frozen in fear, but I always think back to that and wonder.
What did it look like?
So I saw this at night, and it was, so at the time I was dancing with um, an Aztec dance group. And so they had invited me in. They said, we would like you to dance with us, or they said, it's okay if you do. And so I started to dance with them, and I loved it. But we had just finished a ceremony at the Buena Vista Miwok Indian Reservation. And I was walking to my car after the ceremony, so I had planned to spend the night there and sleep in my car. So I had parked off in this field by myself.
Mm.
There was no buildings around, there was no other cars around. So it was just me and my son. I walked out there, put my son to sleep in the car, and then I was changing. So my friend at the time who was with me was still over with other people socializing after the ceremony. So I was changing out of my traje, it's called, or the regalia that I was wearing to dance in. And then I felt this really powerful, eerie feeling. So I looked up and I saw maybe 10 to 15 feet away from me was this being. And it
Wow.
was night. But I knew that it was there because it was blacker than the night. It stood out more than the night did. So I could see this figure just staring at me. And I could see its eyes. I don't remember the color of the eyes. I think they were yellow, but I can't remember that. But I knew that it was staring at me. And as soon as I
Wow.
saw it, I froze because I could feel it. I mean, the first thing that indicated to me that it was there was the feeling. And then when I saw it, I knew immediately that it wasn't a being of this world,
Mm.
and that it was an otherworldly being. And it shook me because it was the first time I'd ever seen anything like that or felt anything like that. So I was frozen. Then my friend came up, and there was a little hill and then a dip down, and that's where I was in the field with this being. So he came up over the hill and he looked at me first. He saw that I was frozen and staring at something. So then he looked over at it and he saw
Mm.
it, and he yelled right away. He said, "Hey." And he took off running towards that being, and it took off running towards the edge of the woods. And so when it ran. I don't know if you've ever seen a video of a bat walking.
Mm.
But that's what this being looked like. It looked like a bat that was walking on its wings, except at top speed. It was flying like that. It was running like that. And my friend was running after it. And he was a runner, you know? It's like he used to run on the side of the highways miles away. So this guy was a runner. So he was running after this being and chasing it into the woods. And once it got to the edge of the woods, it disappeared. So my friend stopped chasing it, turned around, came to me, and told me what he thought it was.
Wow.
And yeah, I was shook for days after that.
Wow. That's crazy. Yeah, I've always been into like even coming into this world into Bigfoot and extraterrestrials or UFOs and just been one that was weird little kid since I was a kid, yeah, as far as I can remember. You know what's interesting about going back to your dream is even the lady I put out today, and I put out an episode and she healed herself through singing. She had a stroke. And I'm hearing more and more, my last several episodes have been about music and healing and frequency. So it's interesting that you were told by your ancestors to sing.
Yes, I do think because of that dream and then my experiences with ceremony, it's always like our most powerful ceremonies as Lakota Dakota people, it's the heartbeat of the drum, the
Mm.
drum, and then our songs that are always a central part of these ceremonies. And so when I connect it with the message that I received in that dream, it's the vibration. That there's nothing that carries a more higher frequency than those songs, especially when they're traditional songs and they're calling in our helpers, they're calling in our spirits, they're calling in our ancestors, and it can be heard far into the spirit world. And so I do think that that's why it's important that we need to remember our songs, to sing, if we're feeling depression or things like that, to put music on, to sing if we have that, to create music. It's such a powerful tool for healing. And then dancing with that, integrating the movements of the body as well. So sound healing is a real thing, even though some people think it's a woo-woo topic at this point. It's actually an ancient form of expression that we have used to not only protect ourselves, but to heal ourselves for generations upon generations.
Oh, that's awesome. Um, yeah, I was gonna share my native name, but everyone laughs at me when I do.
I won't laugh at you.
It's Little Horn. No, it's fine.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
I
I'm
couldn't
sorry.
help it.
But now that I'm older, my mom calls me Little Bighorn. I'm just
Oh, it's
playing.
because she loves you.
Sorry.
Just trying to make you feel better.
Just playing. See, you laughed. You promised you.
My bad. I didn't promise, I don't think.
Going back to what you said earlier, is there any like a specific name for these evil spirits or that create psychic attacks?
Not that I know of yet.
Hmm.
Yeah. I don't know of a specific name for them. I just
'Cause-
understand their energy.
wow. And they're real, right?
Yes, they are. And they even call it, like a suicide spirit, that kind of thing. These different, well, I mean, I think they're demons, but I don't know about the word that we use in our language for it. I
Hmm.
just haven't come across it yet. But if I do describe them myself, I'm very experienced in the world of dealing with demons. So if
Wow.
Christianity wanted to impose itself upon us so much, they certainly did expose us to their demons. They certainly did. And I do believe in that dichotomy of demons and angels because of the experiences that I've had in my life. I feel like I was raised by demons. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie Insidious.
Hmm.
Have you heard of that
Mm-mm.
one? But it in a nutshell, it's talking about this child that had special powers. He was very psychically developed, and the demons or these evil spirits could see that in him. They could see his light, and they wanted to harvest his energy and to use it for their purposes. So they took his spirit and they trapped it in hell. And his father started to realize this because his child was in a coma in the 3D world, right? But in the other world, his spirit was trapped in hell, and behind all these demons that were holding him hostage. And so his father found this out somehow, and then went into hell to release the spirit of his son from the possession of these demons. And, I feel like I was raised in a similar environment. And I feel like the native babies that were taken from their parents and placed in Indian boarding schools were raised in a similar environment where
Hmm.
these beings are so evil and so malicious and so sadistic, and the sacrifices that they're willing to make of us, particularly because they could see our light. They could see our purity and our innocence, especially as Native children who were coming from, at the time, when they first started taking Native children, they were coming from a people who were very connected to the earth, ceremonies, traditions, living a really good way of life, a balanced way of life that was beneficial to the earth. And so, of course, they would want to harvest that energy, and who does
Wow.
that? Demons, vampires, parasitic energies. So I really do believe in the existence of these beings. Not that I'm trying to give them power. It's just that what else could they be? Who else would do something like that? It's so evil. It's not even human.
Well, going back to trauma, like for the alcoholic, right? Alcohol means spirits. So if you
Hmm.
have a lot of trauma and you're in a lower frequency and vibration, and you drink alcohol and you become like an addict, an alcoholic addict, you're like shooting up a flare in the spirit world for these beings that come and suck up your energy, these negative spirits. And they suck on and you have that those spirit attachments or entity attachments, and they'll mess with you until you raise your vibration,
Yeah.
I
And
believe.
I believe that too. And not only that, but they will choose to inhabit people who use those substances in order to hurt other people around them. For example, I feel like a lot of the
You're right.
relationships that I've been in, these where people where I told them, please don't engage in substances because I can't be around you. And it's not because of the substance itself, it's because of those energies, the possession that could happen with them because they would utilize these substances, and that would open them up to being a host for these demonic entities that would then attack me through the form of a lover or a
Wow.
relationship. And I mean, it gets really deep, but it's like I've been dealing with it for so long that I'm really aware of it now, and I've had a lot of time to think about it because it's just like a pattern that has been repeating for my entire life, that those who are closest to me are the ones that the only ones that have had the power in the past to be able to hurt me, because a stranger isn't going to be able to do that to me. So why not send it in through the form of a relationship and so it's been this pattern, and but it's introduced into that person because they choose to engage in that substance. And so then they don't have the strength to fight that being.
You know what's crazy? My last night drinking, I blacked out. You know, when you black out, those beans are taking advantage of you. My friend Carlo, he a year later, a year or two later, he calls me from prison and he's telling me about he was with me that last night. I was drinking, and he talked about when we went back to the apartment. I didn't know he was with me, but he heard me in the bedroom, and he didn't. He heard sounds of demons. He said it sounded like I was fighting demons, and he goes, I didn't even want to bother with you. I was scared, so he
Yeah.
left. And he said it sounded like the Exorcist type stuff, you know. And he's like, well, the next morning, I had a Nirvana experience where I woke up a new person. Like I had a whole different state of consciousness, but I think my entity attachments or whatever, my demons, I was fighting with them to that last second, and then I had a Nirvana experience, which means to blow out, Nirvana or extinguish, and I those were blew out. Well, it was just interesting because I was a different person from that point on, still to this day because of that experience.
So it was a good Nirvana
Yeah, it
then?
was a good Nirvana
Okay.
experience. Yeah, because I had like a ego death. Of course, my ego came back, you know, and I had to do some inner work and stuff like that. But I was into a whole different state of consciousness, kind of like the magic candles when you blow them and then they light back up.
Oh,
That's what
yeah.
happened with my sense of identity. It was gone, and I was in a state of oneness. But it was in a dark space. But yeah, after that, I woke up a new person, and from that point on, I'm doing what I'm doing to this day. So yeah, it was
Well,
for the
there you go.
better.
You made the choice to,
Yeah.
be on the right side of history. And unfortunately, I think within a lot of our communities in this world, I think most people choose the other path.
Mm.
And but the power of being a, a warrior of the light or a warrior for your people is that you hold a certain sort of spiritual energy or signature or aura that is far more powerful than those who do work for the other side. So I was told I was told that we only need 10% of us to wake up and to hold that light,
Wow.
to make that choice. So what you're doing, you probably freed up a lot of intergenerational karma that could have come for your family line, because of that. And instead you chose to be doing this and helping people wake up and helping people heal. And I think we all have that choice now. We've all been in my life. I could have chose to be one of them. I could have chose to stop fighting because it was hard. Can you imagine having to fight your own parents, to fight
Yeah.
your own siblings, to lose everybody that you had loved in a relationship because they betray you, but then you understand why. It's because not even them. It's this force that's after you, this force that wants you to take yourself out, through suicide or substance abuse or whatever it is. And then you overcome that. I mean, imagine the power that you hold at that point when you make that choice and how much change you can make in this world for the better.
Yeah. Thank you. And you had a hard upbringing yourself. I know you had a couple NDEs. Would you touch on any of that before we go?
Yeah, so my NDEs are more the last two that I had. we're deeply spiritual. The first one that I had was when I was about 16, because I remember my memory from my childhood is real broken because of what
Mm.
I went through. But I know that I was in high school and it was probably my junior year of high school. So I was 15, 16, 17, somewhere around there. And I had this accident where I was, it's one of those days where they tell you not to go outside because the blizzard warning is set. And so me and my brothers and sister all suited up and said, we're going to go sledding. Right? So we picked this particularly steep hill and it's got this ice ramp that was built into the middle of it. And so I even watched my younger brother. He went ahead of me and he went on this snow tube and he went straight up into the air and then the snow tube went out from under him. So he kind of landed on his face and busted his nose and he was bleeding a little bit. And so I took notes and I was like, okay, he didn't hold on. So I'm a go now and I'm a hold on. So I did. I
Oh,
held on to that snow tube the whole time. I did not let go as I'm flying straight up into the air, even as I turned upside down and my head was going down first. So I smacked down onto that ice ramp on the back of my head and I was out cold. And from
mm.
the stories that my brother tells me and my sister, I guess I just slid face first down the rest of that hill and they were all just laughing at me because it probably just was funny to watch and they didn't realize that I was out.
Wow.
But I was just laying there with like face down and like just this pathetic hump at the bottom of the hill. And so they came down, they turned me over. I was already turning blue and purple because I wasn't breathing. And so my brother goes off to call to find somebody so he can call an ambulance or call 911. And my little sister sat with me at the bottom of the hill. And I guess about like 3 minutes later, I woke up and I just started screaming. You know, I just started screaming and throwing up. And so I don't remember much from that experience. I didn't have, as far as I remember, like seeing a tunnel or anything like that. I just know that it was one of those experiences that changed me forever. And yeah, I still have, some memory issues from that. And I had hypothermia because it was one of the coldest days of the year that we decided to go out and they had to cut all my clothes off and to get, the brace around my neck and stuff. So I was suffering from hypothermia too. And that was one of the probably times in my life that I could have exited out if I chose to, but chose to stay. So my other NDEs are more current. The first one was when I went for my Hamdecha or my Vision Quest before Sundance of 2023.
Mm.
And so it was the third night of my Hamdecha, and I saw all of a sudden standing in front of me, I saw one of my ancestors, and I knew he identified himself to me, and he was wearing I don't know if you've heard of the dog soldiers, but they have a look. Their war paint, their bonnets. So the bonnet he had on was a full bonnet that had all black and white feathers sticking out and hundreds of them. So that's the dog soldier bonnet. So he was wearing one of those and then he was painted the rest of his body black and white with some stripes. And he was wearing an old time buffalo skirt or robe that had buffalo fur on it and it had red on it. And he had this whistle in his mouth and he was looking at me with his eyes just glowed.
Mm.
And so he held his hand out to me and he said, you can come with me. You can come back home if you want. You can say goodbye to all of this and you can come home. And he kept holding his hand out to me. And, I started crying because how many times in my past did I pray to be able to go home? Because the experiences that I've had in this life have been so heavy. And there were times that I contemplated suicide. there were times I tried to commit suicide and it didn't happen. It didn't work. And then, so then, because of my children, I wouldn't commit suicide. So there were times that I said, I just want to go home. I can't. The hardships of this life were so traumatic at times that I truly prayed from that to have a release and, to go home to where I felt like I belonged, to where I felt like those things wouldn't happen to me anymore. So when he said that to me and gave me that opportunity, it just made all that come back up to the surface.
Mm.
And so it became a very difficult choice to say, no, I'm going to stay here
Wow.
for my son, because I wouldn't want my son to have to face this world alone without me, because I know that my son's autistic. He needs special support. I said, I can't leave my son, to potentially have the childhood that I had just because I'm going to give up now and take this, what I feel like is an easy route, and say, take me home. Nope, I'm going to stay. And I called him Grandpa. Grandpa, I'm going to stay. And I'm going to stay here for my son.
Mm.
So he said, okay. He said, all right, so I'm going to stay with you now for the rest of your life, and I will be walking with you, and I will be protecting you and helping you for the rest of this life. And that was that. So the other one was a little later in 2024. I went to go help one of my friends on her farm. And this was in New Mexico. So New Mexico is pretty dusty, just like Arizona at times. And this is how I found out that I have a special sensitivity to dust. And I was helping her build an adobe house. And my job that day, which was on a windstorm day, was to sift all this dirt that was being used to be turned into mud to build this adobe home. It was my job to sift it through the sifter through a windstorm. So as you can imagine, the dust was just twirling. I took so much dust in. The next day, I just I was on my deathbed for like the next 4 to 5 days. I couldn't eat, I couldn't drink, I couldn't talk, the swelling that I had, they call it toxic dust syndrome or something like that. And because I didn't have insurance at the time, I
Mm.
couldn't get any medical help for it. I just had to make it through. And that nearly killed me. And I know it did, because one night, probably about the third or fourth night, I saw my ancestors standing in front of me again. And once again, they
Wow.
held their hands out to me and offered to take me home if I wanted to come home now. Once again, I said no. And they said, okay, next time though, you can't say no. Next time you're coming home. So I think I've run out of NDEs.
Like, wow, how many do you have?
That's my last one, apparently.
Well, were you showing your son on the spirit world to come back, or you just remembered?
Oh, I just remembered.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. The white buffalo calf woman prophecy. What is that all about
All
amongst your
right.
people?
Yeah, so 19 generations ago, there was a spirit being that came from the stars and appeared to our people. And the first people that she appeared to was these two warriors from our people. So when I'm saying our people, that's the Lakota, Dakota, and Nakota Nation. She appeared to these two hunters that were from the Ocheri that were out hunting for buffalo. And one of those warriors is said to have had a good heart. So when he saw this woman, he saw her for the sacred being that she was, that she is.
Hmm.
And he fell down on his knees in front of her. Well, the other man represented the bad-hearted warrior, which can be translated now into those who choose to recycle these behavioral patterns of abuse, of trauma, etc. These demonic attachments. And so that's what he represented. So
Wow.
he didn't see her for her sacredness. He didn't honor her for that. And instead, he wanted to take advantage of her from the moment he saw her. And he tried to. So, and there are different versions of this story. The one I'm sharing is the one that I was told. When he tried to take advantage of her and approached her, she set the bundle that she was carrying down and she enclosed him in a cloud and he was turned to dust. So essentially, he was sent back to start over again because there was no reform. That's how sick that he was. He had to be sent back and recycled to start over again. So that was the very first teaching that she brought us. And I love this teaching to this day because I have a lot of experiences with predatory men.
Mm.
And I feel that that is a reminder to me of my self-worth and a reminder to others to be really considerate about how they treat other people and the choices that they make. So she told the other warrior then to take that message home and to share it with the people and that to tell the people to prepare for her arrival. So several days later, she appears and she brings the chanupa or the prayer pipe that we use to this day and a bundle that had plant medicines that had, and she brought songs and teachings that essentially became the ceremonial way of life that we still practice to this day. And the prophecy that she said, there will be a time when you will need me again, and I will return to walk amongst you, and
Mm.
you will know that this time is coming. And I do believe that she gave our people the warning that we would go through much hardship, that
Mm.
these tools that she were giving us would help us to make it through these times, but would also help to bring healing to all people. And so we would become the keepers and the holders of this knowledge and of these ceremonial tools and ways.
Mm.
So she said, there will be a time when you will need me again, and you will know that I'm walking amongst you again, or I'm returning, and the signs will be the appearance of white buffalo. So since 1990, we have seen the births of multiple white buffaloes, beginning with Miracle. And to this day, it's like they've become a new genetic species. There's so many white buffalo being born.
Wow.
With the one that Chief Arvel Looking Horse, who is the 19th generation keeper of the original pipe that was brought to us by White Buffalo Calf Woman. There was a white buffalo that was born to a herd at Yellowstone, with the Yellowstone herd being the one that holds the original genetics from the bison that used to roam freely out,
Mm.
the buffalo that used to roam freely out here. And so he considered that to be a significant sign of the fulfilling of this prophecy. And there was a naming ceremony for this white buffalo, and he was named Wakongli, which means return sacred. And that became a significant point for a lot of us that this fulfillment of this prophecy is happening.
Mm.
And so it's only a matter of time before, and I think there's a lot of prophecies with a lot of indigenous nations that speak to the return of these beings that have the power to create monumental change, and that those who oppress, those who target and have benefited off of our enslavement basically are going to be nullified and all their power is going to be taken away. So to me, that's what that her return symbolizes. And I think a lot of people from our nation believe that time is now too.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you for coming on. I had a couple friends that were talking about this documentary that came out called Earthing or Grounding, right? And I go, well, that's not like if it's some new thing, right? I go, that's nothing new. Indigenous people have always known about the sacred importance of staying connected with Mother Earth. and it's not a technique, but it was a way of life, rooted with honor and relationship, like a deeper knowing. And they were like, "What do you mean?" And I go, "Well, Blackout, for an example, he said, let every step you take on the earth be as a prayer." Or Thich Nhat Hanh will say, "Walk as if you were kissing the earth with your feet." Zen master Thich Nhat Hanh. I go, that's not new. Science is just barely catching up. But I appreciate you coming on and sharing your wisdom with us, and helping us remember who we really are.
Thank you. It's been an honor, and you asked the best questions. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you. I'm going to end it with a quote by Ohiyesa. And he said, "Long before I heard of Christ or saw a white man, I knew God. I perceived what goodness is. I saw and loved what is really beautiful. Civilization has not taught me anything better." Thanks for coming on, and hope to do it again in the future, because you're awesome.
Thank you. So are you. And I look forward to that time.
Thank you. Namastizzle.
Namaste.
Just know we out here. Know we out here working in a major way. Had to speak on it just to make a play. Any given subject, know we make a way. Time to level up on a day-to-day. Know we out here working for the greater good. Expand your mind, broaden your lens the way you should. From the stars to the galaxy to speak on spirituality. Higher understanding for the neighborhood.